Hey guys, as you all know, I'm here today to tell you about my life growing up with classic bladder ectrophy. But I'm not only going to be talking about how it affected me, I'll hopefully give you an idea of how it affected my parents and my brothers as well. I was born in a hospital in Glasgow on the 27th of October 1993, and although nothing abnormal showed up on my mum's scans during her pregnancy, she couldn't explain what it was, but she would always say to Dad, like, this pregnancy is different. I have two older brothers, Martin and Kenneth, and she said she didn't know what it was and everything showed up fine, but she said that when I was born, like, something wasn't going to be right. Dad actually admits now that he feels really bad because he used to get really grumpy with her and be like, I don't want to hear this, Jill, our daughter's fine, whatever. Due to complications with my mum's previous two labours, she'd had to have C-sections with my brothers. It had been arranged that she would have a C-section with me, obviously. And a lot of people don't believe this because it sounds so unbelievably ridiculous. But my dad, the night before I was born, was watching television with my two younger brothers, and there was a programme on, and it was about a birth defect that caused children to be born with their organs on the outside of their body. And he said that when he was watching it, it was really graphic and quite grim to watch, and he sort of thought, I don't want to watch this before my daughter's born with my two young boys. Little did he know what he was going to have to deal with the next day, but whatever. So on the morning I was born, normally with C-sections, Dad would get to go and kind of watch his kid, the Kenneth and Martin, get cleaned up and everything. But with me, the nurses sort of said, can you go back and take a seat? And Dad at first didn't think anything strange of that. He just thought, some new procedure, whatever. But after a few minutes, the medical team came over to Mum and Dad, and they simply said, we think we can see your daughter's bladder. My mum and dad had never heard of bladder ectrophy before, and they were left feeling completely lost, didn't have a clue what sort of future I'd have, if I'd have a future. My surgeon at the time eventually came and spoke to my parents, and he said that of all the conditions that it is possible to do something with, the ectrophy was actually the most surgically challenging. He then went on to tell them that I would never be naturally continent, I would never have a functioning bladder, and that I would never have a chance of a normal life. So obviously, minutes after your daughter's born and you're hearing that, it's just the worst feeling ever. So 4 hours after I was born, I was going in for my first operation. As well as having to worry about me, my mum and dad were obviously aware that they had to take care of my two older brothers, who were also quite young at the time. Kenneth was 3 and Martin was 18 months old, so they were obviously still very dependent. Unfortunately, this was actually made really difficult to them due to a lack of family support. My dad's family, they lived down in England, and his parents were getting quite old, so travelling up to Scotland at the drop of a hat just wasn't possible. And my dad's sister also lived down in England, and she had a young family. So unfortunately, they weren't able to make it up as often as they could. And my mum's side of the family didn't accept me because I wasn't seen as perfect. So some of my mum's family refused to come and see me and my mum for 6 to 7 months, while my other mum's family announced that it would be better if I just died on the operating table. Like, from the moment I was born, they hadn't even met me yet. So as well as having to deal with all of that, they felt totally alone and lost and just so down, and Mum had a lot of issues kind of blaming herself, which apparently is quite common. And she had her mum saying to her, file a lawsuit against the hospital, you could have terminated this one. So it's just stuff that a mum doesn't really need to hear.
We're glad she didn't terminate.
I'm glad she didn't terminate. So obviously, other than a lot of my mum's family not being great, my papa was apparently wonderful with me. Unfortunately, he died when I was only 2 years old, but I have been told we were very close, and he'd sit me on his knee and feed me tea and biscuits, and he was very protective of me, but unfortunately I don't really remember him. I'm the youngest person in my family, so I can't imagine what it's like wanting to go and see your little brother or sister for the first time and wanting to cuddle them. When Kenneth and Martin came to see me for the first time, Mum and Dad explained to them that it would be the first time, but that I was being kept in a special place. They were quite worried that everything would look really out of the ordinary to them, like especially me. But what they sort of forgot that was, for any child, everything in a hospital looks really weird. So they probably wouldn't have even noticed that I was in plaster from the legs down. The only time that Kenneth and Martin got upset when I was younger was when they wanted to come and cuddle me and they didn't understand why Mum and Dad would kind of scream at them like, don't touch her, only because they didn't want her to hurt me. So I was getting treated in Glasgow for 4 years, but there was absolutely no improvement being made to my life, and my parents actually found themselves getting really frustrated. They were never being given any definite sort of time scale or anything, and whenever they asked my surgeon, what about our future, what about this? My surgeon then, at the time, would just look at them and say, well, how long is a piece of string? Which is possibly one of the most infuriating answers you could get, I don't know. So, although my parents were fairly sure that I was in the best hands possible, because unfortunately Facebook and stuff didn't exist, they decided that they wanted to try and look for a support group, and they ended up finding one that it doesn't exist anymore, but it was quite popular back then. So we got in touch with the chairperson of it, called Jane Wallace, and she had a 12-year-old daughter who was also born with classic bladder exstrophy. Every year they would have an annual meeting down in London in Great Ormond Street, and when Dad phoned Jane, he was quite surprised because she obviously heard a Scottish accent and had said that her and her daughter were travelling up to an island in Scotland on the same day that my family and I were travelling to an island in Scotland, and it turned out that we were actually getting in the same ferry. So after this, Mum sort of said this was supposed to happen, there's a reason for this. So shortly after meeting Jane and her daughter, my family and I went to London for the annual BEES meeting, is what the support group was called. And this meeting basically included speaking to my surgeon at the time, Mr. Ransley, who would then go on to completely change my life, and to go and look at the hospital facilities in Great Ormond Street. After hearing Mr. Ransley talk and hearing sort of how much more he seemed to know about it than my surgeon back in Glasgow, Mum and Dad sort of discussed it, and I don't think there was much argument, but they decided this is the guy who's going to be in charge of our daughter's health from now on. But they didn't want to feel like they were going behind my surgeon in Glasgow's back, so they sort of said to him, listen, this is what we've done, we've gone to this hospital, is there anything that he can do that you can do? And he said, honestly, I'm not a proud man, if there was anything I'd tell you, blah blah blah, but so he basically said no, stay here. And so I had another surgery there, and I was completely butchered again, so Mum and Dad just thought, enough is enough. The last time I went in for surgery at Glasgow, I came out still wearing nappies with a sort of external stoma thing and having to catheterise every 90 minutes. And for me, my big thing was I wanted to wear big girl pants. So whenever my mum and dad said that to my surgeon, he was always like, oh, we'll deal with that when she's 16. And Mum and Dad were like, this girl is 4 and she wants big girl pants, she's not going to wait 12 years. So basically they decided, that's it, we're taking her to Great Ormond Street. Nearly all of my early memories are associated with my illness in one way or another. I wouldn't really look at Mum and Dad and my brothers and think they're normal and I'm not, but I used to get really annoyed because my brothers would be able to roll around in their stomachs, and I just always wondered why I wasn't allowed to do it. One memory that really reminds me of how much having bladder exstrophy affected my brothers though was once when my parents were trying to get a catheter into my bladder. For some reason or other it wasn't working and I was screaming in pain and probably being a bit dramatic because I'd always get away with it. And my brother Martin actually came running into the room threatening to call the police because he thought that Mum and Dad were trying to kill me. He didn't understand what they were doing, and it's funny now, but obviously at the time Mum and Dad were like, oh my god, our son's going to phone the police on us and our daughter needs to empty her bladder. But he got over it pretty quick, and then he started being your typical big brother bullying me again, so whatever. In 2000 I was admitted to Great Ormond Street where I would finally get my mitrophin off at the age of 6. Because of my previous experiences with anaesthetics, I did have, and I still do have, a totally irrational fear of them. I just can't stand them. So basically when Mum and Dad said that that was what I was doing, there was tears, tantrums, and I'm not doing this, I don't have to, but I eventually did go. And walking into the hospital I was genuinely terrified. I thought I'd never get out again, and I just thought this is more pain and I'm only going to come out worse, because that was how it all sort of happened. But when I walked into the hospital, my nerves were genuinely really quickly reduced because none of the parents looked worried, and all of the children, no matter how unwell they were smiling and playing, and their brothers and sisters were doing the exact same thing with them, and I thought, this is pretty weird, this doesn't happen in hospitals. But I'm not going to lie, I was still absolutely terrified. When I got to the ward, I was placed to I was put in the bed next to this most lovely little boy called Alex. He was fighting cancer, and obviously because we were both sick, it wasn't the same condition, but we both sort of started to help each other through the hard times that children naturally face when they're in hospital. Sadly, because of the treatment that I received in Glasgow, my operations at Great Ormond Street had a lot of sort of bad effects and complications. So I was actually unable to eat for 4 weeks and 1 day there. I spent my 7th birthday there and I was weighing just 21 pounds. So I had to teach myself how to walk again because I'd just lost all the muscle in my legs and kind of the will to live by this point because I was so tired of operations and nothing seemed to be getting any better. But the staff at the hospital were also dedicated and caring. They didn't only make me feel better, but my mum and dad were assured that I was in the right place, and there was play specialists there to take care of my brothers. My eldest brother Kenneth actually always recalls this time to me. One time when I was in the hospital, again there was a problem with my catheters, and again I was probably being quite dramatic and screaming in pain. So all of the nurses and the medical team were around me, and mum and dad were obviously around me. And unfortunately it happens, but kind of the siblings of the ill kids were sort of normally ignored. But what Kenneth found really surprising was within seconds the play specialist was with him and my other brother Martin, and they took them and they played with them and they helped keep their minds off things. And it's actually in fact due to the absolute dedication and hard work of all the nurses and doctors at Great Ormond Street that Kenneth decided that he was going to study to be a doctor. So 2 years ago this summer he qualified from Glasgow University and he is currently working in hospitals around Glasgow, which I'm quite proud of. It's not a bad effort. I said last night that there was a chapter in my book that I never really read, and it's called Tell Daddy I Love Him. But it actually describes an event that is like the most vivid in my mind and horrible. But basically, because my brothers still had to go to school and things in Glasgow, Dad found himself travelling up and down to London non-stop, and I started to look like I was getting better. So he decided, that's it, I'll go home and the boys can start their education again, because it's obviously not fair in them to fall behind. So it had only been a few hours, and it then became clear that my Hickman line had become infected. Because I wasn't able to eat for so long, they inserted a Hickman line that went from my neck through to my heart just to give me nutrients, to try and help me gain weight and gain strength. But it had obviously got infected, and the doctors were frantically trying to work out what to do. They knew I was too weak for an operation, but they knew the Hickman line needed to come out, so they were sort of fighting with all these options. And I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember turning around to Mum and saying to her, I'm going to die, Mum, I'm scared, but tell Daddy I love him and I'll miss him. So yeah, I don't need that chapter. But fortunately, not long after this, I started feeling a lot better. I'd got the Hickman line taken out and they'd eventually started giving me ice cream and soup and trying to get my body used to food again. So I was discharged from Great Ormond Street on Halloween in 2000, which was really cool because it meant I got to go home to a Halloween party. Only a couple of weeks earlier, my good friend Alex, he'd been discharged, and even though I was really happy that he was getting out, I was really jealous and I knew that I'd miss him. But he got me this massive teddy and a big card saying get well soon and everything. So Mum decided to cheer me up because he'd left that she could come to Scotland. And my dad is in the police, so he used to get to fly around in the police helicopters and stuff, which Alex thought was really cool. So Dad said, if you come to Scotland, I'll talk to people and we'll get you in a police helicopter and blah blah blah. So that was all organised, but unfortunately, a few days before he was supposed to come, his parents called and said that he was dying, so he couldn't make it. But after a long and brave battle, Alex passed away in his home at the age of 7, and from what I was told when I was young, but I'm not sure how true it is, he was quite comfortable, so I suppose that's quite reassuring. I feel that this was actually a major turning point for me when I decided I needed to fundraise for this hospital, because I'd realised how lucky I'd been because I knew a patient had passed away, and I just thought my life's totally turned around, and I thought if somebody can raise money for this hospital then maybe they won't all pass away. And I think all you guys will know her now, but Kat Deely, I know she's on some dancing show here. She used to do a show back home called Stars in Their Eyes, and she was my absolute idol. I just loved her, I wanted to be her. So I ended up finding out that she was the patron of the Great Ormond Street Children's Charity. So I was so excited about this, and I wrote to the fundraisers and I said, I want to help. I don't know what I can do, but let me help. Surprisingly, they took my email seriously and they told me that they had a sort of writing competition and it was going to take place at the Hard Rock Cafe down in London, and they had said, if you come, you'll say a speech about your experiences and Kat Deely will actually be there. So I was like not into public speaking at this point whatsoever, but I thought it's totally worth it to meet this woman. So I decided I'm doing this. I was so nervous when I got there. I didn't really know how I was going to handle it, but I went and I chanced it. And for some reason they thought I had done a good job and decided that they would ask me to go and do a speech at the Silverstone Grand Prix launch party in London. Formula One have actually chosen Great Ormond Street as their charity, so every year when they're doing the Grand Prix in London they'll do a sort of big fundraiser now. And the year that I spoke was their first year ever doing it. So I went and I said another speech, and for some reason I ended up getting a standing ovation. So I didn't really know how to take that, so I just kind of walked off stage like, oh, whatever. And there was an auction, and it was all money can't buy prizes. It was like a sleepover for 20 kids at Hamley's toy store and just ridiculous things like that. And I don't know, I can't remember, but I think Dad must have had a couple of glasses of wine. As he turned round to me and he went, "Why don't you try and auction your autograph?" So I sort of thought, oh, okay, like how bad can this go? Not really realising. So after I'd said yes, I thought, nobody's going to pay for this thing. I have just totally shattered my confidence here, but whatever, we'll give it a go. And much to everyone's shock and disbelief, and totally thanks to the amazing auctioneer, a lovely man actually bid £20,000 for my autograph, and I think that's about $30,000, but I don't really know exactly how much it is. So obviously this set me up to speak at a lot of other fundraising events, and it was just doing the same thing. It was explaining my experiences at the hospital and trying to get people to dig deeper into their pockets to give money to such a great cause. In 2006 I was nominated and ended up winning the Pride of Britain Fundraiser of the Year Awards, and this was after I'd helped raise £1 million for Great Ormond Street, and I have been told that this is about $1.5 million, but I am not sure. After it aired on TV, Virgin Books got in touch with me and asked if I would write a book entitled Pride of Britain, which I showed you all yesterday. Throughout all of my fundraising efforts, I kind of realised that I would like to follow a career in events management, whether it was fundraising or even doing amazing things like this. Just bringing people together and helping them, I just think it's the best feeling ever. So I decided, right, okay, how can I do this at university? And luckily, after a lot of research, I found that there was an events management degree at the University of the West of Scotland, not far from my house. So right now I am going into my third year there, and hopefully this time next year I'll be getting ready to do my honours year, which is what I'm really hoping for. So basically, having bladder exstrophy has obviously had a lot of challenges for me, and I'd never stand here and say it was easy or anything. But I can genuinely stand here and say that I'm actually really glad I have it. And that might sound really weird, but when you look at it, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be in America right now. I wouldn't have got to meet my idol, Cat Deely. And to be honest, I probably would not have a clue what I wanted to do in my career at all. So basically, how I put it is, yeah, exstrophy is a huge part of me, but it does not define who I am at all. And if anything, you should just be proud of the scars that you have, because they only remind you of how brave and amazing you are. So if ever your kids, or if any of you guys ever get down that you have scars, who cares? It means that if anybody mocks you for them, you're probably 10 times stronger than they are. So thank you so much for listening.